Hello, everyone. Welcome to Friday Fireside. We have a special guest, Farah, with us today in London. Let me tell you a little bit about Farah. I have to use my phone because she's done so many things, so it's hard to keep track. But Farah started multiple, she's a serial entrepreneur and just recently created, I'm going to get the name right, FFA Security Group, which is a security and canine company that works with hotels around private and hotel security. And she's also the founder of Catcalls of London. So this was specifically why I asked her. She's also a good friend of mine and has done so many things, traveled around the world, and has such a really great perspective on the issues around sexual harassment and how we might address them. So welcome, Farah.
Hi, Gillian, and hi, people watching.
And sorry we had a bit of a delay coming in, but hopefully you're still sticking around for this.
All good, I'm here.
So yeah, Farah, do you want to fill in? There's a lot of blanks in that intro, so please tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Oh my gosh, I think the quick summary. I run Catcalls of London, as you mentioned, which is an Instagram-based street awareness campaign. I also do a lot of facilitation of workshops with young people on the topics of harassment. I run a couple of businesses, as you mentioned, which keeps me fairly busy at the moment, but it's good. It keeps me out of trouble. So,
As well as
um,
Chalkback.
as well as Chalkback. I'll kind of mention that a bit later, I think. But obviously, Catcalls of London is part of a wider collective of international catcalls accounts started by Sophie. Very, very cool. Lots of interesting things to come.
Amazing. Great. So tell us a little bit more about the purpose behind Catcalls and why you thought it was important to be in London or um, and what types of reports have you seen?
Yep. So generally, starting catcalls, it came from years of experiencing harassment in some form or another, whether it was in the streets, in the work environment, whilst out partying, often feeling really angry about it, frustrated, and then more so by the reactions of people that I would speak to about it. It's not a big deal. I'm sure it wasn't as bad as you're making it sound. Are you sure you're not overreacting? So the harassment's bad enough, but then seeing people's attitudes towards it and seeing how quickly they would jump to the conclusion that it was either in my head or I was blowing it out of proportion and that I was somehow responsible for it. And when that happens enough, you start to question yourself and wonder, well, if so many people see it that way, and you question your own sort of self worth in that sense. Anyway, I came across Catcalls of New York, and one, I absolutely loved the format, and I thought it had the potential to just be so impactful. But also, it was really gratifying for me to see other women and girls talking about experiencing the same thing, having the same sort of feelings about it, and really tired of being dismissed when raising their concerns over it. So I messaged Sophie and kind of got started. The rest,
Amazing.
they say, is history.
I think that's such an important thing because, I mean, you mentioned a lot in there, especially around other people's minimization or feeling like, okay, I just need to keep this to myself because what purpose is it going to do if people just make me feel worse about trying to share it and be kind of a trusted confidant? And
Yeah,
I think yeah, and I think it's amazing and so courageous that you were like, there is something that I can do here and took it into your own hands or chalk and put it out into the street. So maybe tell us a little bit like how the accounts work.
Yep. So people will send in their submissions. I ask them a list of questions, and then I will go to the place where whatever happened or what was said to them and chalk the words that were said to them. Take a picture, post it to Instagram. So from a visual perspective, and seeing it out in the streets where it happened, as I mentioned before, I just think it has such high impact, and it has the potential to reach so many people that way and get people thinking and talking, which is
Mm.
what I thought was so cool about it.
That's amazing. And have you had any people's responses like as you were talking of like this is
Oh my gosh,
outrageous or you shouldn't do this?
loads. I mean, I've had people tell me off for defacing public property. I explain that's why we use chalk, because it washes away. Um, but I've also had a lot of really positive feedback back. I mean, you can just look on the account and see some of the types of things that are said. And so when people stop and they read that, a lot of the time they then ask, what are you doing? And when you explain the campaign to them, overall, the feedback's fairly positive.
Mm.
I've had one or two incidents, I would say,
You're
where
like, I need
people
to
have
talk
stopped.
another thing while I'm talking.
Exactly.
Double layer.
Someone trying to get my number while I was talking. I was just like, what? But
Side
yeah,
note, asterisks. Wow, this is happening.
exactly.
And could you tell us, do you know off the top of your head, because there's so many accounts around the world, like what type of reach you have, or, because this has started really only a few years ago and it's really taken up such a massive scale.
Yeah, I mean, as part of Chalk Back, I think there's over 140 accounts, maybe 150 now, possibly more. That was the last time I looked. In terms of reach, obviously, I have no idea, but we're literally on every continent: South America, North America, Africa, Asia, Europe. It's incredible. But it also just shows what a universal experience street
Mm.
harassment is, that it's resonated with so many people in that way.
I think that's so powerful. And yeah, you're a traveler yourself, like you've lived in all these places, and it's not something that you can say is just a London problem.
Not at all. It is literally universal.
Yeah.
Sure, if there's men on Mars, they're out there talking fast too.
Yeah, I can see that. And yeah, what kind of reports do you see? Because you also include a lot of statistics around how people feel or the demographic of some of the people reporting. Can you share anything
Um,
about some of the reports?
I think I've kind of thought about that in a slightly different way to how you'd put it. I think it was more about sort of where Catcalls' purpose and how that's really been evolving. And it started as this awareness campaign, getting people to talk about it, starting conversations. And then for some of us, that's evolved into facilitating these workshops and just a real educational push. For me personally, I feel that's where my work is taking me more, as I really think that this sort of change is going to start with the next generation, engaging young people. A lot of what I do is talk to them about emotional intelligence, empathy, behaving in more community caring ways, because I think that's really important. And the other side, as you say, data collection. It's one thing when we share all of our stories with one another, but when you look at them combined, it is extremely powerful in conveying the extent of the problem. As I mentioned before, Chalkback is made up of a collective of 100 plus accounts, um, all working towards the same cause. And aside from that, really just underlining how widespread and universal the experience of street harassment is. The opportunity to collect data, for example, age of victims, approximate age of perpetrators, clothing worn. And just to clarify, that's not because there's any blaming, but I found as I was getting more and more reports and submissions, the amount of girls that were messaging me telling me that when they were harassed, they were wearing a school uniform.
Mm.
Perpetrators 100% of the time were adult men. And that's taken this conversation and campaign into, I suppose, what's a bit of a darker twist for me, because a school uniform is a universal signifier that a person wearing that is a child.
Mm.
Yet grown men will still sexualize young girls despite knowing that they are in fact girls and children. And then they will call it harmless fun or harmless compliments. And there's absolutely nothing harmless about sexualizing young girls and women in this way.
Absolutely. Oh, it's so powerful. And as you said, like when you can put all of these stories together, then you can see you can start to look at the nuances of kind of like where these issues are happening and who they've been targeted and impacting. And as I'm sure you've experienced, it's not, something that you're like, oh, I'm 18 and now sexual harassment is something introduced in my life. It's from a
Not
very
at
young
all.
age.
I get reports from 11-year-olds, 12-year-olds. I think the largest demographic of reports that I get is under 16-year-olds.
Wow.
Um, so, it really says a lot. And I feel there's definitely something more to look at within that space. What it is, I haven't quite figured out, but
Yeah, because it was only last summer that we got together and did the kind of protests in Trafalgar Square, and I was really taken aback about how young even some girls brought their parents to supervise that young, and especially we did a circle where people came into it and shared some of their stories, and there were I think 11-year-olds and
so
very
many
young
young
girls.
people,
It was really
absolutely.
it was really powerful, but also something that should be recognized on a wider scale. So I guess just to wrap up in terms of, um, I guess we can. I know that you have to leave. So
No, don't
in
worry.
terms of
I
like,
can give you another 10 minutes.
yes. Well, I think it would be important to also talk about the piece around intersectionality and that there's experiences of young women, but it doesn't just stop at sexual harassment. It often includes somebody's potential gender or sexuality or race or religion. And have you seen that carry out? And do you have any campaigns specific to different intersections of this problem?
So obviously, as Chalk Back, we look at and we do different campaigns around the year. So obviously Pride, and we try to put those stories forward. Um, when schools start, we have a schools harassment in schools campaign. Um, I think at the end of the day, it's all about really just encouraging any and everyone to come forward with their stories. Something that often happens is people will come back to me and say, well, this happens to men too, this happens to boys too. And I'm like, encourage them to reach out to us
Mm.
because right now they're not. And so we can't, build that data and talk about the scale of the problem with this happening to them if they're not telling us about it.
Mm.
Um, so, um, you know, obviously with COVID, there's been a lot of racist harassment happening. Yeah, there's so many different elements to
Yeah.
it, so many different intersectionalities, as you say. I don't even know where to start with going like
It's a
fully.
big, yeah, it's a big
It's so
question.
big.
And
We try to focus. We try to encourage everyone to share their stories. Yeah,
that's
I'll
really
leave it at that.
important.
It's really more just trying to reach as many people as possible and get that get the message to people so that we can put that information together.
Yeah, and that's a really important point in that, these do happen to different demographics, and that's why it's so important to have such a reach. And I guess with Talkback, when you are looking at regions that do have a different ethnicity or a different culture, religion, then that can also help build that piece of the puzzle. Um, and so you did mention lockdown. Like, have you seen more reports or people saying that they feel less safe than ever before?
Um, I wouldn't say it's more reports, but I think it's evolved and the type of harassment has evolved. With less people in the streets, there's an intimidation factor that wasn't there before for a lot of people. So the reports I've received during this time, people are expressing more anxiety over escalation that they didn't necessarily have before because there's always that feeling of comfort, I guess, of safety in numbers when
Mhm.
there's people around. Of course, there's COVID-related threats, kind of this weaponization of the virus, intimidation through intrusion of personal space. And the other side is how many women have reported things like they still get told to smile even whilst wearing a mask. And these sort of COVID-related come-ons during lockdown, and also, again, as I said, an escalation of racist commentary, especially towards people of East Asian descent. So I think it's not so much that we've seen an increase in harassment, we've just seen a change in the type of harassment and also what it means to the people experiencing it.
Yeah, it also comes together in that environmental context, like with lockdown. I can certainly relate to feeling less like the environment's completely changed and that you're now in London, which feels like nobody's around, which is very odd.
Oh, it's crazy.
Yeah,
It really. I was in central London recently around Liverpool Street, and I've never seen it that empty.
so weird.
It's a very weird feeling.
Uh, and so, I mean, you mentioned a couple times when you've been shocking and, people maybe some of the backlash that comes, like, what about men? Or, you shouldn't be making this so public. It's, whatever people are saying. But how do you deal with the backlash, by standing up for others and standing up for yourself?
I think when it's sort of that face to face, I generally try to engage with people, educate as much as I can. Instagram, I've stopped engaging. I don't
Online's
know.
another fight.
Ironically, I've received a fair amount of harassment over this harassment campaign. And I was doxxed online, had all of my personal information shared on an incel website. So really that for me served only to underline that this work is important, especially when it gets dismissed. But having said that, as I'm sure you've seen, I've been taking regular timeouts from it and trying not to engage too much, especially with trolls on the page. I usually only reply if I've had a glass of wine, to be completely honest. I lose my sensibility. For me, the idea is to keep the Instagram page as a safe space for people to share their experiences. So allowing people to come in and engaging with them in that way just makes absolutely no sense to me, because often they're not there to learn, they're there to aggravate, and they want the attention. So, and in terms of personal safety, I mean, I'm far more conscious of what I put out. I'm a lot more paranoid about things like sharing my phone number. It is what it is. But yes, regular timeouts, I think, was the answer to your
Yes.
question.
You've done so much, and I was really glad that we got to catch up a few months ago and just make sure that you're all right, because there's so much of that online abuse as well that just is really aimed to kind of take down people's ability to share and have a voice in a different way. So I really commend you for standing up for as many people, like tens of thousands or hundreds. I don't know how many. Or again, your reach is important and really vast. So I guess to wrap up, what would you leave with people in terms of the importance of continuing to share their story and finding the places, safe places that they can share it, know it's doing something, and maybe get support?
Yeah, I think there's a few parts to that. One is there's a sense of community. Harassment can be an extremely isolating experience, so there's power in knowing that you aren't alone with it. So finding communities like our Chalkback community, and there's so many more now, is, I think, just a really important way for people to come to terms with their experiences. But the other side about sharing is, for me, is sensitization to the perpetrators of harassment. Obviously, there's different levels to it, and I think there's a lot of people who just don't see some of the things that they do or say as harassment. And so that education on the impact of their behavior can go a really long way. And for the people who perpetrate more extreme forms of harassment, often they get away with it because of this culture of silence that we've had for so long. And so, with more and more women speaking up about their experiences or confronting it when it happens to them, I think it serves to give those people pause. The next time they may consider perpetrating those behaviors, they won't do it because of, you know, what's happened the previous time. And if we can shame those behaviors away, because that's what it should be, the shame should be placed with the perpetrators and not with the victims. So I think that comes from all of us sharing these experiences together in a public way as possible. And by that, I mean, it doesn't mean that everyone needs to be tweeting their experiences. It can be anonymous, but for like groups like ours where we're collecting the data on it, the more that we have, the more that we can use it to do more things with, and to do good things with.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Far, for joining us. I was so happy that you could make the time in your busy schedule with all of the things that you do, and continue to do. So yeah, we'll make sure to connect all of the details, of Farah, and only good people are allowed to come speak and that need to share their stories, as well as Talkback and all of the cat calls that, whatever city you're in, you could probably find the accounts. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Keep up all of the amazing work, and hopefully we can have you on again soon. But I know we'll touch base at some point, to hear where you're
Definitely.
at.
Thank you for having me, and we'll catch up soon.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining. Happy Friday.